You know, they say you never really know your neighbors until a crisis hits. Well, in California, water is the crisis. It's liquid gold. And when you mess with a man's water supply during a historic drought, you aren't just being a bad neighbor, you're declaring war. Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning, ready to start your day, only to turn the faucet handle and hear nothing but a hollow, dry hiss. No warning, no city notice, just nothing. Now, imagine walking outside, confused and thirsty, and seeing the community sprinklers blasting thousands of gallons of water onto a manicured lawn that looks like it belongs in Scotland, not the parched suburbs of Southern California. That was my reality 6 months ago. I was cut off, dry as a bone, while the Homeowners Association, led by a woman who treated our neighborhood like her own personal fiefdom, watered her prize-winning roses with the very resource she denied my family. And the reason? I was late on a payment. By 2 days. But here's the thing about picking a fight with a geological engineer. We know how the earth works. We know how water flows. And most importantly, we know that if you push nature, or a quiet man, too far, the course of the stream is bound to change. This isn't a story about a helpless victim. This is the story of how I used gravity, state law, and a little bit of backyard engineering to legally redirect the only creek in the county away from their $50,000 irrigation system and back to where it belonged. My name is Ethan Cole. Before all this madness started, I was just a guy trying to settle into a new life. I'd spent a decade working for the EPA, analyzing soil samples and water tables, before moving to the private sector. The pay bump allowed my wife, Maya, and our 8-year-old daughter, Lily, to move into Verde Canyon Estates. On paper, it was paradise. It was one of those upscale, gated communities where the streets are swept twice a week and the trees are trimmed into perfect spheres. Maya loved the house, a Spanish-style villa tucked away at the very edge of the development. It had good bones, a great view, and best of all, it backed right up to a seasonal creek known as Coyote Run. We thought we'd found our forever home. We didn't know we'd moved into a dictatorship. The dictator in question was Patricia Vance. Patricia was the HOA president, a title she wore like a 5-star general's rank. She lived in the largest house on the hill, overlooking the rest of us peasants. She was the kind of woman who would measure your grass with a ruler and fine you if your trash cans were visible for more than 10 minutes after the truck left. Now, you have to understand the context here. California was in the middle of a brutal drought. The governor had declared a state of emergency. We were all being told to let our lawns go brown, to take 5-minute showers, to conserve every drop. But in Verde Canyon Estates, it was like the drought didn't exist. While I was teaching Lily to turn off the tap while she brushed her teeth, I'd watch the HOA's common areas, acres of decorative turf that nobody ever walked on, getting soaked every morning and every evening. It was lush. It was green. It was suspicious. But I kept my head down. We were the new guys. I didn't want to be the water police guy in my first month. The trouble started with a banking glitch. We had just switched accounts, and the automatic transfer for our $500 monthly HOA fee didn't go through. I didn't catch it until 2 days past the due date. 2 days. I immediately wired the money, plus a late fee, assuming it would be a non-issue. 3 days later, I got a letter. It wasn't a polite reminder. It was a notice of delinquency and noncompliance, slapped with a $150 administrative penalty and a lecture about community solvency. I paid it. I was annoyed, sure, but I paid it. I sent an email to Gary Miller, the property manager, a guy who looked like he was perpetually afraid of his own shadow, asking if we could maybe waive the extra penalty given it was a bank error. The reply didn't come from Gary. It came from Patricia. Mr. Cole, the email read, "Exceptions are the cracks in the foundation of order. We do not make exceptions. Consider this a lesson in responsibility." Cold. Dismissive. But fine. Lesson learned. Then, 3 days after that email, the water stopped. I called the utility company in a panic. They told me there was no outage in the area. They checked my account, paid in full. Then the rep paused. "Sir, it looks like there's a localized shut-off request on your lateral line. It was authorized by the property management for code violations." I hung up, my hands shaking. They had cut my water. I called Gary. He sounded miserable. "I'm sorry, Ethan. The board, well, Patricia, cited the delinquency clause in the bylaws. She says until the account is in sustained good standing, Utility privileges can be restricted. Sustained good standing? I yelled. I paid the money. We have a kid here, Gary. It's 90 degrees out. You have to take it up with the board, he whispered. Next meeting is in 3 weeks. For 4 days, my family lived like we were camping in a disaster zone. We couldn't shower. We couldn't wash dishes. We had to buy gallons of water from the grocery store just to flush the toilets. I remember coming home on the second day and finding Maya crying in the kitchen. She had a client meeting and couldn't wash her hair. Lily came home from school dusty and sweaty, asking why she couldn't take a bath. And every evening, at 6 p.m. sharp, I'd look out the window and see the sprinklers kick on in the park behind our house. CH whoosh. Gallons of fresh, clean water spraying into the air, mocking us. That was the breaking point. That was when I stopped being a neighbor and started being an engineer. I knew, professionally speaking, that you can't just water acres of grass during a drought restriction without a massive water bill or a secondary source. And Verde Canyon didn't have a massive budget surplus. So I took a walk. I followed Coyote Run, the creek that bordered my backyard. It was running low, but steady. I followed it downstream, past my property line, into the dense oleander bushes that separated my lot from the HOA common grounds. And there it was. Hidden behind a trellis covered in ivy, humming quietly, was a pump. Not a little pool pump, but an industrial-grade intake system. A pipe ran from the creek bed, sucked water up, and fed it directly into the community irrigation main. I crouched down, snapping photos with my phone. There were no permits posted. No Department of Fish and Wildlife tags. No water rights signage. In California, diverting a natural waterway is a big deal. You need layers of permission. You need environmental impact reports. You can't just stick a straw in a creek because you want green grass. But that wasn't the most important discovery. The most important discovery happened when I went back to my house and pulled out the plot survey from when we bought the place. I laid the map out on the kitchen table, tracing the blue line of the creek. My heart started pounding. The creek didn't just border my land. Because of a weird quirk in the property lines from the 1950s, the creek cut across the back corner of my lot for about 40 feet before entering the HOA land. That meant I was the upstream riparian owner. In plain English, the water crossed my land first. And under California Civil Code, a landowner has the right to the reasonable use of water flowing through their property, especially for domestic purposes during a shortage. A plan started to form in my head. A petty, beautiful, legally airtight plan. But I needed to be sure. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I started spending my days at the local coffee shop, since I couldn't make coffee at home, and my nights digging through water law. I found out that the HOA was extracting roughly 50,000 gallons a week. That is a staggering amount of water. I also met David Ross. David lived 3 doors down. I met him while I was inspecting the creek bank. He was outside, staring at his front yard, which was entirely rocks and cactus. "Nice xeriscaping," I said. He laughed, a bitter sound. "Thanks. Cost me $3,000 in fines." David, it turned out, was an environmental attorney. He had tried to do the right thing, tear out his lawn, put in drought-resistant native plants. Patricia had fined him for non-conforming aesthetics. She wanted green grass, period. "They run this place like a cartel," David told me, leaning on his rake. Patricia and her little inner circle. They used the fines to pad the budget, and they used the budget to keep themselves in power. I've been trying to audit their books for 2 years, but they stonewall me. I looked at David. "What if I told you I know where they're getting their water?" I showed him the photos of the pump. I showed him my survey map. David's eyes widened. He looked at the map, then back at me. A slow grin spread across his face. "Ethan," he said, "if that creek is on your land, you have rights. You can use that water. You can capture it for domestic landscaping and emergency storage, as long as you return the excess flow to the natural channel. And if the excess flow happens to be significantly less than what their pump requires." I asked. "Well," David chuckled, "that would be a terrible shame for Patricia's roses." The next week, our water service was finally restored. I guess Patricia figured 4 days was enough torture. But the damage was done. The bridge was burned. I started my project immediately. I told Maya it was a landscaping feature. A Zen garden water reclamation system, I called it. I rented a mini excavator. I spent 3 days digging a series of trenches in that back corner of my lot where the creek crossed. I lined them with river rocks. I built a beautiful, natural-looking retention pond, about 2,000 gallons worth. Then, I installed the diversion. I built a sluice gate, a simple wooden barrier that directed the main flow of the creek into my retention pond. From the pond, I ran a pipe that fed a drip irrigation system for a new vegetable garden I planted, which is legally protected usage. But here was the kicker. The overflow from my pond didn't go straight back into the main channel where their pump intake was. I installed a French drain system that dispersed the overflow into the groundwater table further downstream, effectively bypassing their intake pipe entirely. Technically, I wasn't stopping the water. I was utilizing it for soil hydration. I finished the system on a Friday. I opened the sluice gate. The water rushed into my pond, filling it up, swirling cool and clear. Downstream, the water level at the HOA pump dropped by about 6 inches, then a foot. By Saturday morning, the creek bed near their intake was little more than a muddy trickle. I sat on my back patio, sipping coffee, waiting. It took about 2 days for the effects to show. The first sign was the sound. Usually, the HOA sprinklers made a sharp hiss. Now, they were making a sputtering, coughing noise. Chug, chug, pft. They were sucking air. Then came the brown. It turns out, non-native grass in California dies really fast without water. Within 5 days, the lush green common areas started looking like a leopard's coat, spotted with yellow and brown patches. But the real casualty was Patricia's house. She had tapped her personal irrigation line into the community main. Illegal, of course, but who was going to stop her? Her prize-winning hydrangea hedge began to droop. Her emerald lawn turned the color of shredded wheat. I saw her out there one evening, screaming at a landscaping crew. She was pointing at the sprinklers, her face a mask of fury. The poor guys were shrugging, checking the heads, trying to explain that there was simply no pressure. She didn't know it was me. Not yet. She thought it was the drought finally catching up to her. She hired a specialist. Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to the landscape, a hydrologist from the state university. She paid him to do a study on why the creek levels had dropped so suddenly. This was her fatal mistake. She brought a scientist into a crime scene. I knew Dr. Thorne was coming because David, my lawyer neighbor, saw the work order. So, I made sure I was gardening in the backyard when he walked the creek line. Afternoon, I called out. Dr. Thorne was a young guy, serious, wearing waders. Afternoon, just checking the flow rates. He looked at my retention pond. He looked at my sluice gate. He looked at the dry creek bed downstream. Nice setup, he said, taking notes. Permitted. Under the riparian domestic use exemption, I said, reciting the code David had memorized for me. I'm capturing flow for subsistence gardening and fire suppression storage. Zero effluent discharge. Dr. Thorne nodded, impressed. Smart. Fully legal. Then he walked down to the HOA pump. I watched him stop. I watched him look at the ivy-covered intake. I watched him pull out his GPS and check a database on his tablet. He frowned. He took a picture. He followed the pipe up the hill towards the common area. 2 days later, there was an emergency HOA meeting. The community center was packed. People were angry. Their dues were high, and the neighborhood looked like a wasteland. Patricia stood at the podium, looking frazzled. Her hair wasn't quite as perfect as usual. We are addressing the irrigation issues, she announced, trying to project authority. It appears the drought has impacted our source. Therefore, the board is proposing a special assessment of $1,000 per household to drill a deep water well and upgrade our pumping capacity. The room exploded. $1,000? People were shouting. That's when I stood up. Madam President, I said. The room quieted down. I wasn't the guy with the dry lawn anymore. I was the guy with the plan. Before we vote on spending $500,000 on a well, I said, I think we should hear from the hydrologist you hired. Dr. Thorne sent his report over this afternoon, didn't he? Patricia froze. That report is internal board documentation. Actually, David Ross stood up next to me, holding a stack of papers. Under Civil Code 4950, all environmental impact reports paid for by member dues are open to the membership. And I have a copy right here. David walked to the front of the room and handed the report to Mrs. Higgins, the sweet old lady in the front row who knew everyone. Read the conclusion, Mrs. Higgins, David said gently. She adjusted her glasses. It says, the reduction in water availability is due to upstream riparian capture, which is legal. However, The HOA's current extraction method via the concealed pump station appears to be unpermitted and in violation of State Water Resources Control Board regulations. Continued operation could result in fines up to $10,000 per day. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Unpermitted, someone shouted from the back. You mean we've been stealing water? And charging us for it? Another voice yelled. Patricia was turning purple. This is nonsense. We have historical usage rights. No, you don't, I said, stepping into the aisle. I checked the county records, Patricia. There are no rights attached to the common area. You've been poaching water for 10 years. And now that I'm using my legal share upstream, your illegal straw is sucking mud. Patricia glared at me with pure venom. You did this. You sabotaged the community. I didn't sabotage anything, I said calmly. I watered my garden. If your system relies on stealing what isn't yours, that's not my problem. That's bad management. Then, I played my ace. Oh, and Patricia, one more thing. I noticed your personal hydrangeas are dying, which is odd, because the potable water lines are fine. Unless you were watering your private garden with the community's illegal creek water? The uproar was deafening. It was a mutiny. People were demanding resignations. They were demanding an audit. But Patricia wasn't done. She slammed her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. Security, remove Mr. Cole. The security guard, a bored teenager named Kyle, looked at Patricia, looked at the angry mob, and stayed right where he was. I don't think so, I said. And you might want to check your email, Patricia, because I sent a copy of Dr. Thorne's report to the State Water Board this morning. And I texted Chloe Bennett. Who is Chloe Bennett? Patricia sneered. The double doors at the back of the hall swung open. A woman with a camera crew walked in. I'm Chloe Bennett, she said, microphone in hand. Channel 4 News. We're doing a segment on water theft during the drought. Ms. Vance, do you have a comment on the unpermitted pump hidden in the bushes? The color drained from Patricia's face so fast I thought she might faint. She looked for Gary Miller, her manager, but Gary was already inching toward the exit, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the drywall. The segment aired that night. It was brutal. They had drone footage of the hidden pump. They had interviews with David explaining the law. They even had a shot of my Zen garden, looking lush and legal. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the board. State inspectors arrived the next morning. They issued a cease and desist order on the pump and slapped the HOA with a fine that made my eyes water. But since it was due to gross negligence and willful misconduct by the board, David filed a lawsuit to ensure the fines were paid by the board members' insurance, not the homeowners. Patricia resigned in disgrace. She put her house on the market a week later. I heard she moved to Arizona, where I assume she is currently yelling at cactus for not being green enough. We held a special election. Andrew Miller, a retired engineer and a decent guy, became the new president. David became the treasurer. We tore out the thirsty turf in the common areas and replaced it with native landscaping, sage, lavender, poppies. It looks beautiful, it smells amazing, and it uses almost no water. As for my diversion system, once the illegal pump was gone and the native plants went in, the HOA didn't need the creek water anymore. So, I adjusted my sluice gate. I let the water flow naturally again. But I kept the pond. It's a nice place to sit in the evenings. The frogs came back first. Then the dragonflies. Last week, Lily and I saw a heron fishing in the water. Steve Thompson, Gary Miller, the property manager, actually sent me a letter. He apologized. He said he'd been bullied by Patricia for years and thanked me for breaking the cycle. He's running a consulting firm now, teaching HOAs how to be sustainable. Good for him. Life in Verde Canyon Estates is different now. It's quieter, but in a good way. People talk to each other. We have a community garden where the useless lawn used to be. I learned a lot that summer. I learned about water rights and French drains. But mostly, I learned that power is a funny thing. People like Patricia think power is about hoarding resources and enforcing rules. But real power? Real power is knowing how the world works. It's knowing that water always flows downhill, and that the truth, like water, eventually finds the cracks in the dam. They tried to dry me out. Instead, they washed themselves away. So, to anyone out there dealing with a petty tyrant in a power suit, check your bylaws. Check your property lines. And never, ever underestimate the power of a little backyard engineering. Thanks for listening. If you've got a crazy HOA story, or if you've ever had to get creative to fight back, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear it. Stay hydrated, folks, and keep your creeks flowing free.